Their answer came as a roar so fierce it seemed to shake the ground beneath their feet. It was not the cry of men who were confident, they were still afraid, but the cry of people who had finally found something worth fighting for again. The demon clicked her tongue in open irritation, clearly unimpressed on the surface, though the growing unity in front of her had started to become inconvenient. Her amusement was thinning. To anyone watching, this felt like the true climax of the entire Mana recap, the moment where everything that had been building finally crashed together. Futile resistance, the demon seemed to think. But Grandfell simply lifted his blade, calm and unshaken. "Believers of the goddess," he commanded, his voice ringing like steel, "advance." There was no flourish in it, no wasted drama. Just a clear order from someone who had decided the next step without doubt. "Slaughter the demon," he said, "and reclaim the honor you lost." At that exact moment, the live broadcast suddenly cut over to a trembling news anchor whose face was already pale with fear. "Breaking news," the anchor said, and even those two simple words came out strained and unsteady. The fear in their voice was impossible to hide. "This is an emergency alert for all citizens. A high-ranked demon has materialized in the Mullen district." As the announcement continued, the screen showed a scene that looked straight out of the apocalypse. Monsters were flooding through the city, overrunning streets, and smashing through everything in sight. Details are still limited, but the area is densely packed with civilians. Casualty numbers are rising every second. "Evacuate immediately," I repeat. Boom. A massive boulder came hurtling through the air and smashed straight into the camera feed. The screen jolted violently before cutting out, while debris rained down over the screaming crowd. The faces around the city went white with terror. The shock lasted only a heartbeat before panic fully took over. Then the stampede began, wild and immediate, as survival drowned out everything else. There was only one instinct left now: run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Nearby, Grandfell slashed through a beast in one clean motion, but his breathing had already grown ragged. Even for him, the pressure of fighting while everything collapsed around them was starting to show. "Holy Knights, listen carefully," he shouted. "Our first priority is the civilians. Protect them at all costs." From the front lines, a voice answered without hesitation. "Sir, yes, sir." But Freya only tilted her head back and laughed, finding the whole thing adorable. "How precious," she cooed. "Look at them scrambling around like ants," Freya mocked, "all while trying to protect the weak." Her smile widened cruelly. "In a situation like this, that's basically suicide." Lee Hoyle grit his teeth so hard his jaw ached. This demon is cornering us on purpose, he realized. She was forcing them into the worst possible choice. "We're stretched way too thin," Lee Hoyle thought grimly. Fighting the boss and evacuating the entire city at the same time. It was practically impossible. Then came a violent crash. One knight was hurled through the air, his armor shattered open as blood sprayed across the street. Freya slowly licked her lips, and the sight of blood only seemed to sharpen her hunger. The more chaos spread, the more delighted she became. To her, the battlefield was turning into a feast. "Boring. So painfully boring," Freya drawled. "How long are you planning to hide behind your little metal dolls?" Her voice dripped with contempt. A demon hunter cowering behind a meat shield. Pathetic. Grandfell remained completely still, his expression unreadable. Then her words sharpened. "Is this how you survived Axion? By letting your comrades die in your place?" she pressed. The taunt struck one of the younger knights nearby like a knife. He glanced back at Grandfell, doubt creeping visibly into his eyes now that the demon had planted the thought there. "Is it true?" the young knight wondered, shaken. "Is he a coward?" The question hung there for a painful moment. Then Grandfell let out a long, heavy sigh, as though the ignorance around him was more exhausting than the battle itself. "You really understand nothing," he said at last, his voice low and cold. Then, slowly and without the slightest tremor, he raised his blade and pointed it straight toward the heart of the darkness, as if drawing a line the demon would never be allowed to cross. "I am merely giving them a chance," Grandfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo said, his voice calm, but heavy enough to stop the shaking knights in their tracks. "A chance to wash away their shame with steel and blood." The words struck deeper than any sermon. Around him, the knights slowly stiffened as the meaning finally sank in. He was not hiding behind them at all. He was allowing them one last chance to stand tall and reclaim what they had lost. Freya snarled at that, her demonic aura flaring violently around her like a storm breaking loose. The ground seemed to tremble beneath the pressure of it. "Arrogant brat," she spat, her voice twisting with fury now that her mockery had failed to shake him. Without another word, she lunged. The motion was sudden and savage, like a beast pouncing after losing its patience. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo's grip tightened around his hilt at the exact same moment, every line of his body sharpening with quiet readiness. "Stay back," he said, and the command alone made the nearby knights hesitate. Then the air itself seemed to scream as Freya's power surged to its peak. Space trembled under the pressure of her mana. "Behold," she roared, "my true glory. My true name is Nephet," she declared, striking her chest with proud, theatrical force. "I am a demon god, and this sanctuary has been feeding my strength for centuries." Her grin widened with rotten arrogance. "Defeat? That word does not exist in my dictionary. I am the true heir of the great evil, the Lord of Sloth." Every word was dripping with vanity, as if saying it aloud was enough to make it absolute truth. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo stepped forward with the ease and dignity of a king approaching a noisy fraud. There was no hurry in him, no visible strain, only that cold and certain composure that made everyone else feel smaller just by comparison. He casually brushed aside the shattered debris blocking his path, as if it were nothing more than dust in the way. Watching the effortless show of dominance, Freya froze for the first time. The confidence on her face faltered, and a flash of real anxiety twisted through her expression before she could hide it. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo dusted off his chest with insulting indifference and gave a small, contemptuous scoff. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried more humiliation than a direct blow to the face. "You dare call yourself a great demon king with power that pathetic?" he said. His voice was sharper than any blade, every syllable soaked in devastating sarcasm. A lucky little minnow that hid inside the goddess's church has grown far too conceited. The insult landed hard enough to make even the surrounding knights flinch. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo continued his verbal assault without sparing her even a glance of mercy. Freya ground her teeth so hard it looked like they might crack, veins bulging across her warped face as fury distorted her features even further. "You arrogant fool! You don't even know your place," she screamed. Whatever was left of her composure vanished right there. Driven by rage, she unleashed a chaotic blast of energy straight at him, more like a tantrum given form than a clean attack. "How dare a mere mortal?" she began. But Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo did not even bother reacting dramatically. He remained completely unmoved, his face as calm and undisturbed as the surface of a frozen lake. That calm alone made her outburst look even more pathetic. "This is nothing more than a crude imitation," he said coldly. "But for a bottom-feeding creature like you, it is more than enough." Then he extended his hand, and from that quiet motion alone came a chill so deep it felt like the abyss itself had opened nearby. Absolute zero. He spoke the spell name almost casually, but the moment the words left his mouth, the world around them seemed to freeze in fear. The temperature plunged so violently that even breath turned sharp in the air. Freya tried to spit back another furious retort, baring her fangs as if rage alone could overpower what was coming. But the bravado in her face was already beginning to crack under the creeping terror. The self-proclaimed demon god Nephet froze where she stood, her weight, her limbs, even her mana turning numb in an instant. Then she realized too late that the spell had been a trap all along. Her face went deathly pale. "What is this? Release me at once, you insolent worm," she shrieked. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo answered with a smirk so superior it made her look even smaller. "You are nothing but a foolish demon trapped inside the tiny world you built for yourself." Then he clenched his fist, and everyone felt the end coming. With a gaze colder than the ice surrounding her, Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo let his mana surge outward. That clenched fist gave shape to jagged spears of white frost, each one gleaming with fatal precision as they all aimed directly for Freya's heart. "Learn your place, trash." The line hit harder than the magic itself. In that instant, all of Freya's arrogance vanished. What remained was naked, primal terror. Her whole body shook violently as the reality of death finally settled into her bones. Impossible! This cannot be happening, she screamed, and the force of that cry shook the entire area. Do you have any idea what I endured to get here? As panic consumed her, her mind flashed backward to a dark memory, an image of a demon lounging in lazy indifference. You summoned me, my master, she had once said. The Lord of Sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. Back then, Freya had still been naive enough to mistake opportunity for favor. With lowered head and trembling devotion, she had said, I entrust my fate to you. At that point, she still believed she had been chosen for something grand. Do I truly deserve such a great honor? She had asked. The demon Lord of Sloth only waved a grape lazily through the air, looking bored out of his mind. Yeah, the holy war, or whatever, he muttered, sounding as though even speaking required too much effort. Even dealing with those demon hunters is a drag, he said, barely interested. Just handle it however you want. Freya bowed deeply, hiding her face as she answered, Thank you, my lord. But when she raised her head again, a twisted smile had already spread across her lips. Full of ambition, he clearly hadn't bothered to notice. How foolish, Freya had thought in secret, to abandon Mirian and all its believers just because demon hunters are annoying. Even then, contempt was already taking root inside her, quietly poisoning whatever loyalty she claimed to have. There in the shadows, Freya celebrated her luck and began weaving a treacherous little conspiracy of her own. She had not been grateful. She had seen opportunity, nothing more, nothing less. I will absorb every negative emotion these humans spill and rise as the next great evil, she had vowed. Back in the present, she threw her cracking hand toward the sky and screamed desperately. I was wrong, my master, Lord of Sloth. The arrogance in her voice had finally given way to naked fear. But her hand was already beginning to disintegrate, breaking apart into nothingness before her eyes. Terror swallowed her whole. Please, I beg you, spare me, my master, she cried, no longer sounding like a demon god at all, just a coward staring at the end. Moments later, her entire existence was erased from the air without leaving so much as a trace behind. No body, no scream lingering, no shadow. Then the darkness that had smothered the area began to lift, and the first light of dawn quietly broke through the sky. Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo turned and walked away, giving only the briefest glance over his shoulder as a holographic system window rose into view before him. Even after defeating a monster like that, he looked almost insultingly composed. True name Demon God Nephet defeated. Level up. The message gleamed in the air with cold certainty. Meanwhile, Lee Hoyle's face had practically gone purple from shock as he stared at what had just happened, struggling to process it all. Good heavens, and he's still acting calm after that. Lee Hoyle thought, half offended and half horrified. I nearly died of a heart attack just watching it. That was genuinely dangerous, terrifyingly dangerous. He shuddered, remembering the sheer chaos of flying boulders and collapsing destruction. But inside, Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo was feeling something much simpler and much less glamorous, relief. His timing had been perfect. Thank God I used absolute zero when I did, he thought inwardly. Beneath the cool exterior, there was a quiet sense of satisfaction that things had not slipped out of control by even a second. I really learned a lot from Sus, he admitted to himself. The thought had barely finished forming when a reverent voice suddenly broke through his train of thought and dragged the moment back into the present. Oh, last descendant of House Asen, the voice said in awe. Then the entire Holy Knight Order dropped to their knees in worship all at once, armor clattering across the ground. Somewhere in the confusion, a stunned voice shouted, Lee Hoyle defeated the saint. He killed the demon, another voice cried. Junu shot up from his chair so violently that it nearly toppled backward. His whole body was trembling as he stared at the screen in disbelief. A character that isn't even in the game data just got soloed, he muttered, swallowing hard. The words barely sounded real even as he said them aloud, which only made the shock hit harder. This whole situation could have turned into a max-level nightmare, Junu said, still staring wide-eyed. Lee Hoyle just saved the entire server. That realization hit him with enough force to leave him visibly shaken. He openly burst into tears and pressed his face right up against the monitor like a man witnessing a miracle. "Did you all see that?" he sobbed. "This is peak leveling Manhwa content right here." His excitement was so raw that no one could mistake it for an act. Lord Lee Hoyle defeated the demon goddess, voices shouted. "Amen. He's strong as a gorilla. He's the physical embodiment of light." The crowd came rushing forward with phones raised high in every direction. "Lord Lee Hoyle's grace," someone yelled, as if the whole place had suddenly turned into a holy site. "You're standing in the exact spot. Hold still. Let me get a selfie," someone screamed. Lee Hoyle was still kneeling on the ground, trying to recover, when Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo's voice cut neatly through the noise. "As for the details, let us discuss them inside the sanctuary over tea." The contrast between the chaos and his calm invitation was almost absurd. Lee Hoyle blinked and stared at him in confusion. He thought. The sanctuary had just been wrecked by the demon's rampage. But Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo merely spoke one phrase with quiet ease. Restoration magic. The moment he did, it felt as though the very laws of physics reversed themselves. Massive chunks of broken stone rose into the air as if pulled upward by an unseen will, swirling together with perfect purpose. Lee Hoyle and the crowd watched with dropped jaws and bulging eyes as the impossible unfolded in front of them. In only a few moments, a magnificent sanctuary stood there once more, pristine and complete as though it had never been damaged at all. Lee Hoyle muttered under his breath in complete disbelief. The ruined sanctuary of Murian, restored instantly to its original glory. He stared at Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo's back, trembling slightly as one thought echoed louder and louder in his mind. Just what kind of monstrous power does this man actually have? Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo walked past the stunned crowd as lightly as if none of this were particularly remarkable and gestured for everyone to follow. "Come, let us enjoy some tea and talk. It seems we have a long story to unravel in this manner." Recap. Behind him, the holy knights remained kneeling, their voices joining together in gratitude. "Thank you for protecting Murian." Inside the sanctuary, the atmosphere was so peaceful it felt almost unreal, as if the violent battle outside had belonged to another world entirely. The hall stood majestic, clean, and whole again, wrapped in a calm silence that made the earlier destruction feel dreamlike. Manhwa slightly increased. A steaming cup of tea was gently placed on the table, and with it came a heavy silence that no one seemed eager to disturb. Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo took one measured sip before speaking plainly. "So, the reason Murian did not participate in the Holy War was because a demon was controlling everything from the shadows." The knight commander standing nearby answered with solemn certainty. "That is correct." Then he lowered his head in shame. "At the time of the Holy War, we were ordered to stand down. Even now, the memory of Saint Freya's voice seemed to linger over him like a stain he could not wash off. Retreat at once, she had ordered back then. He remembered how weakly he had protested. But House Asen is still fighting. Freya had turned on him with demonic fury blazing in her eyes. "Are you defying the direct order of a saint?" Her face had darkened with malice in a way he only now understood for what it truly was. That was the moment she decided the Church of the Goddess would withdraw completely from the war. At the time, none of them had known the truth behind that command. Only now did the full ugliness of that decision stand exposed. Lee Hoyle nodded with a look of sympathy. "I guess it's kind of like the Magic Tower," he said, "when the higher-ups order a retreat." His tone was simple, but there was understanding in it. He knew how little room ordinary people had to resist orders from above. "What choice do the grunts really have?" Lee Hoyle added quietly. But Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo's eyes remained intense. "I understand your position," he said. "House Asen simply maintained its noble pride until the bitter end." At those words, the knight clenched his fists, tears gathering in his eyes. I am truly sorry," he said, then slammed his fist against his chest plate with renewed resolve burning in his gaze. "From this moment forward, the Church will honor its word and formally make its request. Will you permit us to take part in this holy war as well?" Granfell Claudia Arpeus Romeo. Romeo's voice rang through the hall with clear authority, heavy enough to make everyone straighten where they stood. "If that is truly your will, Then bring me every so-called miracle of the goddess without exception. Then, in a calm but cutting tone, he began to lay bare the dark truth hidden beneath the church's wonders. At the very bottom of Miriam's fountain, he explained, there grows a rare herb known as zera, a plant so unusual that almost no one would recognize it at a glance. That herb's effect, he said, is the real face behind what people have been calling miracles all this time. The demon had used it to induce hallucinations, cloud minds, and quietly enslave the faithful, spreading her influence little by little while they mistook it for divine grace. Grandfell Claudi Arpius Romeo narrowed his eyes, his stare turning sharp and severe. Protecting believers from falling for tricks this cheap and this vile is also part of a holy knight's sacred duty, he declared, his voice carrying both contempt and responsibility. The commander froze, then stammered in visible shock. You had already figured out that much? Before anyone could respond, he suddenly spun on his heel and broke into a run, shouting over his shoulder that he would send men to retrieve it at once, his panic making the urgency of the matter even clearer. At that moment, the pentagram of pure knowledge revealed itself in all its brilliant splendor. With only a single glance toward the fountain, its power exposed the concealed properties and identities of every herb present, as though the world's hidden botanical secrets had been peeled open in an instant. There was no doubt about it. This pentagram was an item that belonged in the realm of the gods. The moment it was equipped, it granted absolute understanding of every plant and mineral across the entire continent. Even so, Grandfell remained elegant and composed, lifting his teacup with effortless grace as he calmly examined the goods they had brought before him. Li Hoyol wanted those materials for research more than anything, but his other self remembered the people around them and, without hesitation, delivered a line that instantly chilled the air. I shall present these as a birthday offering to Elder Choi, he said, as if the decision had already been made and needed no further discussion. Inside, Li Hoyol immediately panicked. What? Seriously? Why not show that kind of respect to your own mother first? His thoughts thrashed around wildly, flailing in every direction like a ridiculous inflatable tube man caught in a storm. On the outside, however, the Grandfell persona remained perfectly stoic, a noble figure quietly sipping tea without the slightest crack in his expression. Meanwhile, inside his head, his true self was dancing through pure chaos, overwhelmed by second-hand embarrassment and barely holding himself together. Grandfell slowly unfolded a golden message sealed with unmistakable authority, and the moment his eyes skimmed the contents, his brow tightened. It was a letter from the Magic Tower, and the weight of it was obvious even before a single word was spoken aloud. The message itself all but screamed catastrophe. Its meaning was painfully simple and brutally urgent. Can you return to the tower immediately? There was no ceremony in it, no wasted language, only the sharp pressure of an unfolding emergency. Fran, a young mage gripped by fear, trembled where he stood. Even in silence, the terror in his face said everything. His thoughts shook just as badly as his body, and the atmosphere around him was so tense it felt hard to breathe. This is the worst disaster in recorded history, Li Hoyol muttered under his breath. The words came out low and strained, but even so, they carried the awful certainty of someone who already understood how far beyond normal this situation had become. The moment he realized this was not just trouble but a true calamity, he mentally screamed at the man controlling his body. His thoughts burst out in frantic protest, desperate to stop what he feared was about to happen next. Please, just stop. If you go through with this, there's no turning back after that. His warning was raw and urgent, the kind of plea someone makes when they know the next step will change everything for good. But Grandfell stayed cold and absolute, moving forward without offering even a single word in reply. His stride never faltered. As he advanced, the memory of his earlier decree came rushing back with heavy force, sharp and vivid enough to drown out everything else. From this day forth, you are the leaf of 4 seasons, Cad. The declaration echoed like a sentence carved into fate itself, and the system screens immediately began flashing in a frenzy, reacting as though the entire world had recognized the importance of that moment. The spirit's new name, Leaf of 4 Seasons, Cad, had been formally registered. The instant that happened, the spirit evolved straight into a special rank, leaping far beyond ordinary growth. That legendary name spread through the spirit realm of Akina like thunder rolling across the sky. The tiny spirit blushed, completely overwhelmed by the strength pouring through her. Such immense power, and yet it is such a gentle name, she said, sounding both shy and deeply moved, as though the warmth behind the name meant even more than the power itself. Thank you, Master, she said with heartfelt sincerity. Meanwhile, Li Hoyol was crying imaginary tears of shame inside his own head, convinced he might actually die from embarrassment. Then the scene shifted, pulling the story back to the magic tower several hours earlier. Granfell had coolly confirmed it with his usual detached calm. Naming the spirit, he spoke the words as though this were merely another task to be handled, while everyone else understood that the decision carried far greater consequences than it first appeared. A red-haired girl answered at once, her tone sharp and direct. Yes, rumor says you are the contractor of a nameless goddess. Li Hoyol's soul practically gasped in horror. Are there really no secrets anywhere in the spirit realm? Still calm, she went on to explain that contracted spirits rise to a higher plane when they are granted a proper formal name. Furthermore, your spirit is a sprouted seed of the world tree. It has the potential to become a special rank existence, something that far surpasses the ordinary limits of most spirits. The one standing before him was none other than Pantaroth, a high-ranking spirit mage of the tower, and she continued her explanation like a patient lecturer determined to leave nothing unclear. I thought you should know, Pantaroth said. Li Hoyol quickly sorted through the situation in his mind. Fine, I get it. I just have to give it a name. But then a dreadful realization hit him all at once. Wait, hold on. Granfell was a character he had created during his most painfully edgy teenage years, which meant, naturally, that Granfell's sense for naming things was somehow even worse than a middle schooler's dramatic dark fantasy phase. The thought alone made Li Hoyol want to fold in on himself from pure anticipatory shame. But Granfell simply spoke in a soft, composed voice, as though he were announcing something perfectly reasonable. The Leaf of Four Seasons, Cad. The moment the name left his mouth, Li Hoyol clutched his chest in phantom pain, as if his soul itself had taken a direct hit. I knew it, he thought in despair. Why does it have to be so long, so flowery, and so unnecessarily dramatic? It sounded exactly like the kind of name someone would come up with while trying far too hard to look cool. Now every spirit in the spirit realm would know that this unbelievably cringe-worthy name belonged to his contractor. Completely unbothered by any of that, Granfell shifted the subject as if nothing embarrassing had happened at all. Very well. What is the current situation in Akina? Hyen and Kadath bowed respectfully before reporting that the Overlord Magic Tower at the Manhwa mine had been activated and was now unleashing its full power. In a low voice, she added, "It is raining mana destruction down upon the demon hordes." The image alone was enough to make the scale of the battle feel real, as though the sky itself had turned into a weapon. Memories of the villagers flashed through Li Hoyol's mind in quick succession, each face bringing back the weight of what was at stake. Then the spirit quietly offered her conclusion, as if trying to steady the fear growing in the room. The innocent civilians nearby are safe under its protection, she said. Then she continued her report in a more solemn tone. Even the world tree has manifested. The scale of the event was no longer something that could be dismissed as an isolated battle. Akina is undergoing a miraculous transformation, and all of it is thanks to you, Master. But just as the praise settled, Hyen hesitated. Her voice began to tremble slightly, and that hesitation alone made it clear the next words would not be good news. However, the demons are retaliating with terrifying ferocity. The three demon kings, they have all erupted in rage at the same time. The sentence landed like a cold blade, and the room's mood dropped in an instant. Li Hoyol's thoughts immediately raced. Three monsters on the level of Decorabia from Frost City? Just imagining that much power gathered in one place made his stomach twist with dread. A full-scale chaotic war is about to erupt right here, he realized. This was no longer a matter of one dangerous enemy or one unstable region. Everything was spiraling toward open disaster. Then another awful truth struck him. If that was happening here, it meant the rifts of the three demon kings were opening on Earth as well. The realization hit hard, because the danger was no longer distant. It was coming for both worlds at once. Granfell stepped forward and took command of the scene with the calm force of someone already prepared for the worst. "I understand," he said, his voice low and steady, instantly silencing the room around him. "Hyen, clear the perimeter." His order came without hesitation, direct and absolute, leaving no room for confusion about what needed to happen next. Hyen Kadath answered immediately. "Yes, my lord." Magic surged around her as she cast her spell, and the sight left Li Hoyol completely stunned. Wait, all of these fallen leaves were monsters? Before he could fully process it, Granfell's voice deepened with grim resolve, making the reality of the coming battle impossible to ignore. "Let us return. It is time to prepare for war." The words landed with chilling finality, and almost at once a system alert appeared as if responding to that declaration itself. System update in progress. 3 Demon Kings. Rift 1 added. Rift 2 added. Rift 3 added. The internet exploded the second the notice spread. Comments flooded every screen in a frenzy that felt almost like collective madness. What the hell is this? 3 Demon Kings at once? Are we actually doomed this time? Inside the control room, one official stared at the monitor with sweat beading heavily across his forehead. "This is a code red emergency," he said, his voice tightening as his face turned pale. "All 3 rifts are escalating at the same time." Even saying it aloud made the situation sound unreal. "The collapse rate is climbing faster than anything we've ever seen in a normal mana recap scenario. Collapse progress, 3%. The official could barely get the words out as the system projected one horrifying statistic after another in front of them. Recommended level analysis complete. Rank 67, Demon King Amdusius. Recommended level, 820. The numbers alone were enough to make the room go still, but before anyone could even process that, the display moved on to reveal the next nightmare waiting behind it. Rank 66, Demon King Cimaris. Rank 64, Demon King Floros. The names appeared one after another like a death sentence being read aloud, each one heavier than the last. Recommended level, 850. The figures were so absurd they barely felt real. Beside him, a black-haired rookie started to panic, his composure cracking under the sheer impossibility of what they were seeing. "Senior, what are we supposed to do? Can the chief really stop something like this? We're talking about the legendary 72 demon gods here." The brown-haired senior said nothing at first. He only ground his teeth, his eyes widened in horror, and that silence was more frightening than any answer could have been. The analyst in glasses suddenly shouted, "Chief, Akina's update has completely destroyed our predictive models. Every assumption we had is broken now." His voice was strained and sharp, carrying the panic of someone watching all certainty collapse in real time. The chief typed furiously, having already made his decision. "There is only one person capable of facing this calamity. Li Hoyol." The rookie's face drained of all color the instant the name left his mouth. But even Li Hoyol can't take on 3 Demon King rifts by himself at the same time. The chief didn't hesitate for even a second. "Then we'll make him face them, no matter what it takes." The screen lit up with a harsh glow as streams of data began transferring at high speed. Lines of classified information flashed one after another, turning the already tense room even colder as everyone realized something irreversible was happening. The rookie nearly screamed in disbelief. "Did you just send classified enemy data to player Li Hoyol?" His voice cracked from the shock, and the question rang through the room like an accusation no one was ready to answer. Giving special intelligence to a player is a direct violation of the fairness doctrine. The chief answered in a cold, flat voice, "I'll take full responsibility." Then he turned back toward the monitor, his eyes burning with desperation so fierce it almost looked like anger. "Earth's survival is hanging by a thread. Who the hell cares about rules now?" The words dropped heavily into the room. After that, no one said a thing. A crushing silence settled over everyone, thick with fear and reluctant understanding. The chief lowered his head slightly and whispered a prayer into the humming digital void, as if speaking to the screens themselves. "Please save us." It was quiet, almost swallowed by the machinery, but everyone close enough heard it. "No. Save all of humanity, Li Hoyol." Elsewhere, the sun bled red across the horizon as evening darkened into something far more ominous. The fading light felt less like sunset and more like a warning that night was bringing disaster with it. Granfell studied the phone in silence, his mind moving with razor-sharp focus. Detailed enemy data. Every line, every number, every note was taken in without waste, his expression calm even as the weight of the situation pressed in around him. This will be useful, he said to himself in a low, measured tone. In the background, a news broadcast murmured through the air near his ear, while his breathing grew heavier, not from fear, but from the pressure of time slipping away. I need to move faster. On the broadcast, the anchor announced that thanks to player Lee Hoyle, the Mon incident had been safely resolved. The report went on to say that citizens had returned to their everyday routines, enjoying a fragile peace they believed would last a little longer. But they had no idea the real nightmare was only just beginning. That brief calm was nothing more than the quiet before something far worse, and the gap between public relief and the truth made the coming disaster feel even crueler. The ominous broadcast continued, but the moment the update about the Demon Kings reached the public, anxiety spread across the world like wildfire. Fear traveled faster than reason, and in an instant, countless people felt the same chill settle into their hearts. The news anchor openly asked the question on everyone's mind. Could humanity survive another catastrophe like this? Meanwhile, Granfell Claude Arpius Romeo had been training his body in silence ever since the announcement first dropped, as if he had already accepted what must come next. Then, without warning, the holographic system interface flared to life in front of him. A penalty quest had appeared, triggered by the weakened state of his body, its bright letters shining with the kind of merciless clarity only the system could deliver. Run 20 kilometers. 1,000 push-ups. 300 jumps. Completed. Daily target achieved. Lee Hoyle sucked in ragged breaths, his whole body screaming in pain, but he had still managed to push his stats right up to the absolute limit possible in this leveling mana scenario. Granfell Claude Arpius Romeo slowly rose to his feet and spoke in a commanding tone. Status window. At once, the blue system screen flickered into existence before him, shedding pale light over his face as it revealed the full measure of his current power. Lee Hoyle examined the data with cold focus. No excitement, no relief, just calm analysis. At this point, every number mattered, and every small gain had to be weighed against the scale of the disaster waiting ahead. Level 390. He was now within the ranking range, which meant the phase of explosive rapid leveling was over. But that no longer mattered the way it once had. He wasn't simply grinding for experience points anymore. Now he was building himself for war. A pristine white coat materialized behind him, pure and immaculate, almost glowing in the dim light. The system chimed with a high-tier alert. Special grade white coat. Level requirement, 350. It wasn't just equipment. It felt like proof that he had stepped into a higher realm of power. On his finger, a special grade vortex signet ring made for level 350 began to glow with a deep, steady light. The ring hummed with restrained force, as if it, too, recognized that the moment for hesitation had already passed. Granfell Claude Arpius Romeo stood there in full splendor, every part of him sharpened for battle, his eyes blazing with quiet resolve. There was no doubt left in his expression now. He looked like a man who had already chosen his path and accepted its cost. With this, I am ready. Let the hunt begin. Without the slightest hesitation, he strode forward, wrapped in a fierce and absolute confidence that made even the air around him seem to tense in response. A short while later, the sky above Frost darkened, not with storm clouds, but with a vast swarm of messenger owls sweeping overhead. Their wings covered the heavens in motion, turning the scene into something eerie, grand, and impossible to ignore. Down in the fields, workers stopped what they were doing and slowly looked up in stunned silence. Awe spread from face to face as the atmosphere grew heavy, everyone sensing at once that what they were witnessing was not ordinary news, but the opening movement of war. Elsewhere, a door slammed open so hard it struck the wall. A messenger rushed inside, clutching a sheet of urgent orders in trembling hands. The command was clear and immediate. Halt the construction of yet another fortress before any more resources were wasted. Far away in the Yusa archipelago, Kish and Loish looked up just in time to catch a scroll dropping through the air. The message arrived with perfect timing, almost as if the wind itself had been ordered to place it directly in their hands. The contents left no room for doubt. The battlefield was ready. The time for war had finally come. It was the kind of message that changed the meaning of every breath taken after reading it. Back at the magic tower, silence pressed down like rain until Marcelo, lost in thought, felt something shift. It was subtle at first, more instinct than sound, but enough to pull his attention away from everything else in an instant. His expression darkened the moment he noticed the owl waiting just outside the window. The stillness of the bird, the timing of its arrival, and the feeling hanging in the air told him before he even touched the message that this was no ordinary summons. The letter unrolled on its own, glowing with lines of magical text that floated with an unnatural brilliance. Each word shone like a command branded into the air, impossible to misread and impossible to ignore. The time for vengeance is now. The sentence was short, but it carried the full weight of old anger, buried promises, and blood that had not yet been repaid. Step out of the tower. The glowing words slowly faded, marking the true beginning of the Great War. Marcelo's lips curled into a small, satisfied smirk, the kind that came from finally hearing the call he had been waiting for. Not long after that, an army of armored warriors began appearing at the rendezvous point in steady waves. Steel flashed, banners stirred, and the gathering force looked less like a troop deployment and more like a legend taking shape before the battle had even begun. Kish and Loish arrived quickly, standing in silence like shadows at the edge of the field as they watched the storm gathering around them. Marcelo came soon after, followed by a formidable procession of mages whose very presence made the atmosphere feel denser and more dangerous. A powerful voice boomed across the area. "We have been waiting for you." At the same time, the system flashed a red alert overhead, bathing the assembled forces in a harsh warning light that set every nerve on edge. Three-dimensional rifts were ripping open in real time, tearing through space with violent instability. On live news, the anchors reported with shaken voices that the association's threat predictions had become completely useless in the face of what was now unfolding. "We admit our limits," the anchors said openly, no longer pretending they had control over the situation. As they argued over the breaking developments, one truth became impossible to avoid. This was not just another monster surge. It was the beginning of an apocalypse. This rift was on a scale even the association could not handle. It wasn't some temporary emergency patch like before. This was a main update, something fundamental and terrifying. Does that mean constant updates from now on? Are those level numbers even real? The balance of the entire game has officially collapsed. In North Gang, the cameraman recording this mana recap moment suddenly froze in place. Then, without warning, he turned around so fast it was almost violent, his eyes widening in pure shock as he completely forgot about the broadcast and stared toward the horizon. The live chat exploded at once. Why did he stop? What is he looking at? But the cameraman, overcome by the sight in front of him, burst into tears of joy right there behind the camera, too emotional to even explain himself properly. They're here. They're really here. The rest of the crew could only stand there with their jaws hanging open. Approaching in the distance was a procession of legends, figures every person in the world would recognize on sight. At the very front stood Li Hoyle. Behind him marched the Harkon Knights of Frost, the Shadow Mercenaries of Yusa, the Holy Paladins of Onin, and the Mages of the Tower. They moved together as one force, an impossible alliance that looked like something pulled straight out of myth. The strongest powers on the Arcana continent had united, and every last one of them was advancing behind a single man, the player Li Hoyle. The sight was so overwhelming that it felt less like reality and more like history being written in front of everyone's eyes. The comments section instantly went insane. Whoa, am I actually seeing this right now? Messages poured in faster than anyone could read, each one filled with disbelief, excitement, and raw emotion. Are those NPCs really moving together? This has to be Li Hoyle's command. I can die happy after seeing this. Wake up, camera staff, film Li Hoyle Nim right now. Everyone calm down. I knew Li Hoyle could mobilize this kind of military force. The comments crashed into one another in a wild flood, making the screen look like it was shaking. The Korean branch office had fallen into total chaos, with everyone rushing around in panic except Seo Union and Junsa. They stood quietly before the monitors, still and focused, their eyes locked on Lee Hoyle as if nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. Union felt a wave of relief the moment she saw him there. Junsa murmured that with power on that scale, sealing the rifts was no longer just a fantasy. Then he corrected himself, his tone growing heavier. No, it's more than that. Lee Hoyle is aiming for a victory far beyond anything we imagined. Meanwhile, Lee Hoyle reached the objective. From this moment on, he commanded, "We exterminate the Demon King according to the strategy." His voice was steady and absolute, leaving no room for doubt. This was not a reckless charge. It was the beginning of a calculated hunt. Seo Union gasped behind the screen. Right then, inside the dark and terrifying rift, the Demon King's castle stood looming in the distance, massive and oppressive, like a nightmare given solid form in the middle of a dead and twisted world. The system displayed the raid roster. Matistium of the Magic Tower. The Shadow Mercenaries Ben, William, and Sharon surged forward alongside Holy Knight Commander Talum Eber and his 18,000 knights. Across from them, ferocious monsters roared with ravenous hunger, eager to tear every one of them apart. But before that tide could swallow the field, the mages of Matistium unleashed their assault, and the battlefield burst into a dazzling kaleidoscope of fire, light, and utter destruction. Then the first boss appeared, and the rage radiating from it was visible even at a glance. Its very presence twisted the air, making it clear that this was no ordinary enemy, but a furious ruler stepping onto the battlefield in person. Demon King, rank 67, Mdugius, level 800. Why are the tower mages here? He roared, his voice shaking the ground beneath them. Inkari looked down at him with cold, almost bored contempt. I expected this much, he said flatly. High mages of the tower are not opponents to be taken lightly. One subordinate let out a smug laugh. Our master, Lee Hoyle, stands even above them as commander-in-chief. Did you really expect anything less? Now I understand why the commander made this call. Ben William laughed with open delight, fully enjoying the chaos as spell after spell flew from his hands. It's been far too long since I could cast magic this freely, he said, almost sounding refreshed by the carnage. Then he turned toward the mages and asked if they should move at once to support the next rift. Matistium calmly shook his head. Do not rush, Senior Ben. He pointed toward the map and named the next battlefield. The Castle of Depravity. Lockett and Harkon are already there, drenched in monster blood. The raid list for that sector flashed into view. Flash Tower Mage Ba, Shadow Mercenary Lit, and the others assigned there had already entered the fight, each one positioned for a battle that was only growing more violent by the minute. Lee Hoyong Hart, Commander Harkon, and 100 knights had only just finished their mission there. Even so, the aftermath around them made it clear that the battle had been anything but easy. They had just slaughtered Demon King rank 66, Simmeries, level 820. Lockett roared like a mad beast in the middle of the bloodshed. Don't steal my prey, you filthy bastards. His voice was wild with battle lust, and he looked more like a monster than the demons he was cutting down. Harkon stood slightly apart, watching that berserker display with a strange mix of awe and concern. Even as he kept his composure, his thoughts quietly drifted back to the leash that bound him to his lord. Lord Lee Hoyle. Harkon realized with chilling clarity that after this battle, his master's overwhelming presence would be carved forever into the history of Arcana. His very existence is the pillar that holds our peace in place. If he ever falters, the whole world will begin to collapse. The thought echoed with the same unbearable burden the Emperor himself had once carried in ages past. I tried to imagine the worst possible outcome. Even letting his thoughts go that far felt heavy, like opening the door to a future no one wanted to see. But he simply closed his eyes, refusing to let history circle back into the same tragedy again. I cannot imagine him being crushed beneath that fate. Even after their private council a few days earlier, the Emperor still could not fully grasp Lee Hoyle's true aim or the full weight behind his decisions. Victory over the demons was inevitable. But total annihilation? Why was he so determined to wipe out their very existence from this world? He had offered no excuses, no long explanation, only a decree so cold it left no room for doubt. It is necessary. That frozen expression on his face had not been a simple warning. It was a silent declaration of war, the kind that told everyone this conflict would not end until something had been erased completely. Meanwhile, at the hunting castle, the roster was shockingly small. Li Hoyle, Commander Marcelo, and the shadow mercenary Kichi. Even Hoyong's soul trembled at the sight of those meager numbers, because the mission ahead felt far too large for such a tiny force. Then Li Hoyle casually dropped an order so absurd it felt like a thunderbolt. "Bring me the Demon King's head before my tea gets cold." He said it with such calm certainty that it was somehow even more terrifying. Locket and the soul both gasped in pure horror. "Excuse me? Is he serious? We are absolutely doomed." But then, right in the middle of Li Hoyle's internal screaming, a familiar sound sliced through the tension. He recognized that presence at once. "So, you finally arrived." The others lifted their heads in confusion just as massive shadows rolled across the ground and swallowed the sunlight. For one brief moment, it felt as if the sky itself had been blocked out by something enormous. Locket slowly raised a trembling finger toward the heavens, too stunned to do anything else. His entire arm shook as he tried to point out what he was seeing. "What in the world is that? Leviathan?" The name came out half as a question and half as a terrified prayer, because whatever loomed above them looked far beyond human scale. Marcelo's eyes narrowed the moment he saw it. Recognition came to him almost instantly, and his expression hardened with grim understanding. "Airships," he said. He knew the design immediately. They were the undisputed masterpieces of dwarven engineering. Li Hoyle thought back on everything that had happened. Even after dismantling the goddess church, the system had refused to mark the quest as complete. Then the update window appeared. Class quest updated. The fall of Ascon and the demon hunters. The final hunter must uncover the dark truth behind the holy war. This was the central mystery of the entire Mana recap scenario, which meant a third party had been manipulating the holy war from the shadows all along. Li Hoyle had already begun to suspect as much. And if he was right, then the dwarves were the key to everything. They were the ones who designed Ascon's ultimate weapon, the final Machina Tower. These were the same dwarves who had once stood face to face with the demon kings themselves, even the strongest among that terrifying triad, and had survived long enough to leave their mark on history. A blue system window chimed softly, confirming the theory he had been chasing. At last, the system had generated the quest he had been waiting for. Class Quest, the Ascon Frontline. The words alone carried the weight of an entirely new battlefield. Objective: ratify the Dwarven Treaty. Current conflict: Demon King Floros versus the dwarves. Mission parameters appeared one after another, laying out the stakes with brutal clarity and making it clear this was no side task, but a turning point. Join the faction and lead them to glorious victory. And just like that, yet another crushing burden was added to Li Hoyle's growing quest log. One more impossible responsibility stacked on top of everything else already pressing down on him. Locket pointed toward one battered vessel in particular, his eyes fixed on its damaged frame. Even from a distance, it looked as though it had somehow crawled its way back from hell. That airship looks like it's been through hell. Its hull was covered in the scars of brutal war, and the sight made Hoyong's soul twist in pain. "Grandpa, just look at our ship. We've ended up hitching a ride on the Dwarf Express." But that battered vessel represented decades upon decades of painstaking dwarven research and craftsmanship. To a dwarf, an airship is as sacred as a mage tower is to a wizard. Their whole civilization had staked its pride and survival on fighting the Demon King, and the proof of that resolve was right there in front of him. Li Hoyle gave a faint smirk and pressed the matter further. "Except, I haven't forgotten the ancient covenant. Notification. Faction selected, Alliance of Iron." At that, he finally let part of his guard down. "I'll never question your pride again." But then a crimson warning window suddenly flared before him, and the blood drained from his face in an instant. "Alert! Demon King Floros has marked your faction for death." A horde of monsters came crashing down almost immediately. They descended like a living storm, filling the air with shrieks, claws, and killing intent. "Everyone, scatter! I'll carve us a path through this nightmare." The order rang out sharp and clear. It was time to claim the head of a demon general, and no one there could mistake the intent behind those words. Marcelo unleashed his magic without a trace of hesitation. and a single devastating spell erased an entire swarm of beasts in one blast. The explosion lit the field with raw destructive beauty, leaving only ruin where the monsters had been. Lee Hoyle stood in the middle of the carnage, calm and unmoving. "He's watching us through these weaklings," he muttered, already certain that the enemy's eyes were hidden behind the disposable monsters flooding the field. The air suddenly turned heavy, as if something vast and regal had entered the battlefield. The aura of a true king had arrived. Lee Hoyle began the sequence without wasting a second. Skill activated, Natural Predator. Item selected, Corrupted Priest Robes as Tribute. Skill activated, the Grand Exorcism Ritual. Each system line appeared with crisp certainty, and together they formed the opening movements of something dangerous and deliberate. He was forcibly summoning a trace of Demon King Floros' past into the present. Then the scene flashed back to a few hours earlier, to the Mage Tower's legendary Garnet Hall, where the preparations for this moment had truly begun. The Keeper announced, "Team Leader Lee Hoyle, you are the last one." Hoyong's soul stared around in awe at Garnet Hall, the vault that housed the tower's most god-tier artifacts. Usually, materials were simply shipped out to his lab. This was the first time he had ever stepped into the tower's holiest chamber with his own feet. "I just hope there's still some legendary gear left," he thought as he checked the logbook. But everyone else had already stripped the vault of its most terrifying weapons. Hoyong's soul drifted helplessly toward what remained. The illusion gold idol, the miniature Mano-san, the sage's staff. Even the leftovers felt impossibly grand to someone who had been stuck on the outside for so long. After being shut out for so long, even these cast-offs looked exciting. Was there anything here he could actually use? Then Lee Hoyle reached out and picked up a plain piece of cloth. "I choose this." The soul immediately doubted the decision, but Lee Hoyle only smiled, as though he already saw value no one else could. "This is more than enough," he said. The soul nearly wept at what looked like trash-tier loot. It was tragic, honestly, but the sad reality was simple. The other artifacts all far exceeded his current level cap and would only kill him if he tried to force them. The miniature Mano-san required level 820. Trying to wield it right now would bring instant death. Even the idol demanded level 800. Those relics were treasures, yes, but they were treasures meant for someone standing on an entirely different level. Back in the present, Demon King Floros finally materialized before them. "A demon hunter," he said, his voice dripping with mock amusement. "I applaud your arrogance for daring to summon me directly." His very appearance made the battlefield feel smaller. Rank 64. Demon King Floros. Level 850. The system displayed the information with cold precision, making the impossible threat standing before them feel even more real. Does a fragile human truly believe he can hunt a king? He scoffed, openly mocking their weakness. His tone was filled with the kind of contempt only a creature convinced of its absolute superiority could show. "That machine tower may be a nuisance to my minions, but before a demon king, everything is only prey." Floros threw his head back and laughed. "Now I shall show you what a true apex predator looks like." The arrogance in his voice was as monstrous as his power. But Lee Hoyle didn't even flinch. Instead, he looked straight at the Demon King and answered in the coldest tone possible. "You're ugly, and you talk too much." The insult landed with brutal simplicity. The Demon King's expression twisted at once. He snapped instantly, all that regal mockery collapsing into naked fury in the span of a heartbeat. "You insolent wretch." Floros raised his bow as dark energy crackled violently around it, the power gathering fast enough to distort the space nearby. "You really chose to face me alone? You are going to regret that decision more deeply than you can possibly imagine." Lee Hoyle recognized the technique at once. It was Storm Arrow, a skill fierce and fast enough to tear through the battlefield like a shrieking gale. He slipped past it with effortless ease, as if he had already seen the attack coming. Even I knew this was absurd. The ring on his finger flashed sharply, and that was exactly why I had piled on every buff in the game without holding anything back. A system alert rang out. The Seal of the Wind had been activated, and its cooldown was set for 24 hours. That meant there would be no second chance, so this was the moment to unleash absolutely everything. All magic damage was doubled for 1 full minute. On top of that, With the elemental spells already stored in advance, he could skip the chanting phase entirely and fire them off the instant he wished. Li Hoyle drew his mana together with absolute focus. The masterpiece-grade white feather cloak let him release a relentless storm of stored elemental magic in an instant. The item's effect activated cleanly, and thanks to the masterpiece aesthetic stat, his luck surged to an unbelievable height. Floros froze on the spot, visibly stunned by the sudden spike in power flooding the air. What is this power? Floros could barely force the words out, his voice shaking. Li Hoyle's mana was draining at a frightening speed, but even so, it was still more than enough to bring down a low-tier king. This was beyond overkill. Now it was time for him to pay the full price for his arrogance. Pure white wings burst from Li Hoyle's back in a blinding explosion of light, and in that instant, he steadied his mind completely. Granfell Claudi Arpius Romeo, a name wrapped in pride so lofty it would never allow him to tremble before something as lowly as a demon. I had already swallowed every miraculous elixir in my inventory. One boosted magic power for an hour, another offered minor mana regeneration for 3 hours, and a final one granted a massive surge of mana for 30 full minutes. 100 elemental spells were fully loaded, locked in place, and waiting to be unleashed. Right now, I felt completely invincible. Brace yourself, because I was about to rain down enough destruction to scar a century before I even began to unfold my own personal domain. This was more than an attack. It was a warning and a clear declaration of war. The only reason I had kept this hidden until now was because Marcelo was still kneeling in the sanctuary, carrying the weight of his penance in memory of the enigmatic elder mage, Senios. Granfell Claudi Arpius Romeo, the last surviving scion of the Ison bloodline, now stood tall as one of the great pillars of the magic tower. One of their own had been butchered by a demon's hand. The moment that memory resurfaced, the flames of battle roared even hotter inside him. He understood that kind of loss all too well, and he knew just how crushing that pain could be. His gaze sharpened until it looked fiercer than ever before. Pride that high would never permit failure. Then, in a desperate bid to turn the tide, the Demon King Floros launched another savage assault. Li Hoyle only answered with a cold scoff. You made one fatal mistake. The demon, beaten into the dirt and trembling with fear, could only stammer in disbelief. Impossible. I've never heard of a demon hunter like you. Even in the middle of recovering his mana, he did not hesitate to correct the beast. This isn't a hunt. His voice dropped lower, turning into a whisper so cold it felt like death itself had leaned in to speak. My absolute rule is total annihilation. For Granfell Claudi Arpius Romeo, this was not merely victory. This was absolute dominion, overwhelming and unquestionable. Flesh crumbled into dust as wave after wave of bombardment rained down without a shred of mercy. The Demon King Floros was engulfed in a hellish storm of agony, his body being burned away under the relentless force of the onslaught. Poison tore through his veins, frost gnawed at his soul, hemorrhaging drained away his life, and agony shattered what remained of his mind. Paralysis locked his body in place. Darkness swallowed his vision whole. Absolute confinement crushed any hope of escape, and then, with one final strike, the very fabric of space exploded around them. That power did not stop at breaking his body. It crushed his spirit too, pulverizing even his will to go on existing. The Demon King's scream rang out like a curse spoken at the edge of death, only to be swallowed entirely by the blinding light that consumed him.